All right, Merle, welcome back.
Thank you.
I think more than any person I've interviewed, you got more requests for a follow-up interview than anyone.
Oh, it's so great to be loved. Fuck you.
Your brother kind of made you notorious. You guys were both
Yeah.
very, very well known, well loved in the punk rock community.
Well loved and well hated, believe me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
which is fine. You know what? As long as people are talking, that's all that fucking matters.
That's what your brother would have loved, right?
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about your brother. So for
Okay.
viewers that don't know.
My brother was the most notorious, the most outrageous, the most dangerous rock and roll performer of all time, bar none. His live shows are legendary. They consisted of nudity, self-mutilation, defecation, masturbation.
Lots of blood.
Lots of blood, lots of violence, confrontations with the audiences,
Yeah, lots of fighting.
oral sex on stage with men and women, people leaving shows with broken bones or on stretchers. I'm not shitting. This all happened.
This was the 80s, right?
This was the
Early 80s.
80s and 90s.
The 90s.
Because in the 90s was the time period that the Murder Junkies were touring with my brother.
Yeah, even though like the Sex Pistols and some of the bands that were so notorious early on in the punk scene, you and your brother became you almost represented that community better than anyone.
Well,
in terms of that
yeah, I mean, you know, we obviously were influenced by, you know, the early punk stuff, the Ramones, the Sex Pistols, the Dead Boys, all that stuff. And as they kind of folded off, or I think my brother was disillusioned by all of it, by the fact that he felt that a lot of those bands
Sold out.
started to sell out.
Yeah.
And he stayed true to his guns throughout his whole career, whether people liked it or not. I mean, the critics hated it. I mean, there was not ever one good fucking write-up about anything G.G. Allin ever did. You know, if he had been more like soft and pussy fucking punk and all that shit, you know, like sugar-coated fucking punk rock that there is today, people would have loved him. But, you know, when you write songs about murder and rape and torture and killing and, you know, all that shit,
He stuck to his guns.
people don't take you serious, so they don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
You know?
Unlike a lot of the other punk, you know, before him,
Yeah.
he'd never really mellowed out.
No, not at all. He took it to extreme levels, you know. I mean, there was nobody doing anything like he was doing. You know,
Where does that come from?
you know, growing up, we had a really...
Tell me about your family growing up.
Beg your pardon?
Tell me about your family growing up.
Okay, well, my mom met my dad 1953, 54. She was 17 fucking years old.
This is New
My
Hampshire?
dad was like 30 something.
New Hampshire?
In New Hampshire.
Rural New Hampshire.
In a small town of Lancaster, New Hampshire. And she got pregnant right away, so they got married. 1955, April 1955, I came along. And a little over a year later, my brother came along. And we were both born in Weeks Memorial Hospital in Lancaster, New Hampshire, population 3,000, something like that. We grew up in a 3-room log cabin on an RFD2 road between Lancaster and Groveton in a town called Northumberland. We lived in a 3-room log cabin with no running water.
You have electricity?
Electricity we had, but we had no running water. We had to go to wells and bring big jugs of water. We had no shower, no bathtub. We had a small kitchen. You walk into the cabin, there's a small kitchen. Off the kitchen, there's one small room with a toilet. No, bathtub, no shower, no sink, no nothing. A toilet. That's it. The next room is the living room, which also was my mom and dad's bedroom. And the third room, which was so small, we had to sleep literally in bunk beds. So that was the first 10 years of our life. We lived with a domineering father that was very strict. I mean, he named me after him, so I'm Merle Jr., but he named my brother Jesus Christ Allin.
So Gigi's real name is Jesus Christ?
His real name was Jesus Christ Allin up until he went into the first grade, and my mom, I don't know how she ended up getting him to change it, but she changed it to Kevin Michael Allin. So
so that begs the question, what was going on with your dad that he named your brother Jesus Christ?
Well, my dad, was a fucking nut job. I mean, he was a religious fanatic who did not follow what he preached. He did not practice what he preached. He would send us off to fucking church every Sunday, and he would stay home just because he wanted to get rid of us for the day, So, yeah. So that was basically, we were pretty isolated as kids. We didn't have neighbors with kids to play with. So we basically, entertained ourselves by playing outside, and, we were able to hear music. My dad had records like Merle Haggard. He had some Johnny Horton, some Willie Nelson, Hank Williams, stuff like that. So that was our first introduction to music, you know.
You and Gigi were close?
Oh, yeah. Me and Gigi were very close, yeah. I mean, we had nobody else.
You had no one else.
So, and we were close our whole life, So basically, we really didn't have anything. We were dirt fucking poor,
What was your dad doing for work?
My dad worked in a paper mill in Grofton, and my mom worked like odd jobs as a waitress, at little restaurants and stuff like that, But we had no fucking money, and we really had the bare necessities. A big day for us would be going into Lancaster, which is the little town, and there was a little store there, Sammy Evans's, and they had a candy counter, right, under a big glass thing. This was like, the 50s, early 60s, right? And they had penny candy, and we were like, if we had 5 or 10 cents to buy candy, we were like, that was a great day for us,
But what were you guys like as like high school years, teenage years?
Teenage years. Well, I'm getting up to that. My mom left my dad. My dad raped my mom. Like, we went to school one day. We came home. My mom, the next day, she took us out of the house and we left. We were gone. This was 1965. And apparently my dad had raped my mom like continuously the whole day before. And that was the last straw. She was like, fuck this, I'm done.
Were there drugs involved in your dad's life?
Drugs? No, just my dad was very antisocial. He didn't want people around. So we were sheltered for the first 10 years of our lives. Like I said, we didn't play with kids. We had hardly ever had company. The only company we ever had was the doctor, because the doctors made house calls back then. So we were sick all the time because my dad, like when it snowed in the winter, he would let the snow accumulate and cover up the cabin because he didn't want people like seeing or coming to our house or whatever, you know. And so we were always sick in the winter. My brother had asthma when he was young. So yeah, we had a rough start, you know. And then after my mom finally left my dad, we went to live with my grandmother, my grandmother was the main reason that my mother married my father to begin with, because she wanted to get away from a domineering mother. So she marries my father, who's almost as dominating as her mother was. But so we ended up living with my grandmother for a few years in her house, and then she had a house that was next to her house, and we had one of the units in her other house. So we were living right next to my grandmother.
Where was this?
This was in Lancaster. Yep. And at that time, I mean, as I had said in the last interview, we had seen the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and that kind of cemented what we wanted to do with our life, you know, as it did for many people. But, you know, when you're as isolated as we were, you know, it was like, wow, what is this that's going on out here, you know? And once my mom left my dad, we were able to have a little bit more freedom, especially with my mom working and stuff. So it gave us more time to, you know, raise hell and do shit and find experiment and stuff. But we had a friend that, my mom had a friend who had a daughter that was a few years older than us. And she was into all the British invasion music, like Herman's Hermits, Dave Clark 5, all that stuff. So we started listening to stuff like that. And then eventually we left New Hampshire and moved to Lunenburg, Vermont. We were basically on the border of Vermont, New Hampshire, where we lived. So we moved to Lunenburg, Vermont, and at this time we're, you know, starting to be in our early teens, and it's like, you know, we were hearing bands like Led Zeppelin, their first album, early 70s, Aerosmith was like gods to us. You know, early Aerosmith. I mean, we saw Aerosmith play at Plymouth State College when Dream On was just breaking, you know. And I mean, we would hitchhike to concerts all the time. We saw the original Alice Cooper band in '72. We saw the Ziggy Stardust tour, Grand Funk Railroad, Led Zeppelin, Kiss, every fucking band, you know. Any chance we had to see a band, we would hitchhike, like Maine. We hitchhiked up to Montreal a lot to see shows, you know, and we were just fucking teenagers, you know. I mean, I don't think I would do that today, but back in the 70s, it was, you know, it was a lot more innocent times, and you could do shit like that and get away with it, you know. But so, yeah, we were going to a lot of shows, and we were collecting records. I mean, music, we basically were living music 24/7. Everything involved in our life was about music. We would go to department stores and steal records. We would break into cars. We'd break into like summer houses to get whatever we could do to sell stuff to buy music. That's what we did all the time, you know. My mom even called the cops on us once. Yeah, she found a stash of stolen goods in the closet. And she called the fucking game warden up on us, and the fucking came down and confiscated all of our shit. But I mean, it was more like something to do, you know. I mean, we were bored kids in a small town with nothing going on. And
did your brother always have that defiant, anti-establishment?
Well,
attitude?
You know, it's funny because growing up, we were the kids in our town that everybody talked about. You know, there's always one or two weirdos in your town that, like, oh, that guy, stay away from him, you know. We were those guys, you know. I mean, my brother, we got picked on a lot because, you know, we grew up with a lot of rednecks and farmers and fucking ugly fucking fat chicks, and, you know, so we never got laid, and we didn't really care. We were all just about music, you know. But yeah, so we got picked on a lot because we were different, you know. I mean, my brother would go into like department stores and buy clothing in the women's department, you know. He had like these really cool, like fucking green pants with big white fucking dots all over, you know. And then he had these like yellow fucking bright yellow, like jeans and stuff. And, you know, nobody dressed like that where we were from. You know, people were wearing fucking coveralls and fucking straw hats and you know, flannel shirts and shit, you know. And at that point, you know, we were into the glam, you know, we were obviously into Alice Cooper and you know, T-Rex and the New York Dolls. This was 1973, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So we, you know, playing music back then, we wanted to dress the part, you know, and like all the people that we were influenced and idolized, you know, and we went to concerts all the time, so we saw like just all these great costumes and outfits and leather and silk pants and, you know, weird clothes, and that's the kind of shit we wanted to wear, you know. And so this is, you know, at this point, we're starting to play music. It took us a while to be able to play music because we didn't have the funds to go out and buy equipment, you know. So around 1975, we formed our first band together. It was a band called Little Sisters Date. And we played from like 1975 to early 1976, I would say. We played the bicentennial, so it would have been, I guess, mid-1976. We didn't play a lot of shows. We played some outdoor shows and stuff like that, but we weren't really ready to play clubs and stuff yet. You know, we were still learning how to play. We were playing like, you know, the kind of songs we were playing were like anything that was 3 or 4 chords that we could actually play over and over, the same thing, you know, because we weren't good enough to play any. I mean, my brother was a very good drummer, you know.
But in 1976, the punk scene was just beginning.
Yeah, yeah. So we were playing, and the thing is, you know, we were a band from New Hampshire, and all the other bands from that era that lived in New Hampshire, they were all playing like your top 40 music. So you go to a dance or you go to a show and listen to a band. You're going to hear the Doobie Brothers. You're going to hear China Grove. You're going to hear everything that's popular at that time. Every band was playing, except us. Now we were playing like Aerosmith, Kiss, some Iggy Pop, some MC5. Just off the wall shit, Black Sabbath, you know, the kind of stuff that nobody was playing at clubs at that time, for sure. You know, it was all about making money, and top 40 was the way to go. Nobody was playing anything original, you know. So, but that band didn't last very long. And I was actually still playing guitar at that point, and we couldn't keep it going, so that band folded pretty quickly. And the next band that we got together would have been the same year, was a band called Malpractice. Now, Malpractice formed me and my brother and a guitar player from Gorham, New Hampshire. His name was Jeff, and he was really a good guitar player, real good guitar player. And at that point, we had all gotten better at our instruments, so we were actually sounded like a real band, you know? And so we started playing shows, and we actually, but we were playing the same kind of songs still. I mean, at that point, you know, 1976, 1977, we were even throwing in Ramones songs because the first Ramones album we'd heard. And once we heard the first Ramones album, that was like the end right there, you know, no more of this fucking arena rock shit. We were all gung-ho for 3-chord punk rock, you know, simple, stripped down, say what you got to say and end the fucking song, you know. So we were traveling around. We were doing like Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont circuit, playing a lot of the same songs. I mean, we threw in like a, you know, a Peter Frampton song or a Steve Miller song. You know, you have to throw in something here and there that people are going to want to hear. But back in those days, you know, you would go and you were all by yourself. You know, it's not like today there's 4 or 5 bands on a bill, right? We had to travel with our own equipment. We had to bring a sound system with us. We were traveling in like this big fucking like Howard Johnson's bread truck, right? With no fucking heat, right? So and you know, in the winters in fucking New Hampshire, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont are fucking cold, you know? So we would travel to shows and we'd be wearing like skidoo snowmobile outfits in the van, in the bread truck, because it was so fucking cold, you know? And you go to a show and you'd like play 3 or 4 sets every night. You'd probably make like $100, $200.
For the whole band.
For the whole band, yeah, you know? But once again, we didn't give a fuck. We didn't care about the money. Nobody cared about the money back then. It was all about, fuck, we're playing fucking music. We're fucking living our fucking dream here. We're in a van, we're traveling to shows, we're playing clubs, and people are showing up to see us play. That was like magic for us. Didn't give a fuck about the money. We could have lost money and it still would have been fine, you know. And that went pretty well for a while. And like everything else, it kind of burned itself out. You know, we recorded a record. We did do a single. It was the very first record that me and my brother had ever done together. So, you know, we thought we were pretty fucking special, man. We thought we were fucking big time. You know, we did a single called Devil's Triangle and Love Tunnel. And, you know, we had we're young, right? We had this image of, oh, we recorded a record, man. Now what's next? Now we got to get signed to a big label and hit the big time, right? You know, I mean, that was like our dream, but of course that didn't happen. We were just another band, you know, and at that point, like I said, we had already seen the Ramones, and at that point, heard the Ramones. And at that point, the whole punk thing started to come along. And Gigi basically was tired of playing drums. He wanted to be the guy. He wanted to be the guy out front. So he stopped playing drums and reverted back to the name that I gave him when he was born, Jesus Christ Allin, because when I was this high, I couldn't say Jesus. So I would say Gigi. So the nickname for Jesus was Gigi. And so he picked that name back up after he decided he wanted to be a front man. And around 1978, Malpractice had folded. We were looking, you know, we had played in Boston with Malpractice. We'd played in New York City with Malpractice. So
what happened the first time you guys went to New York City? That must
Wow.
have opened your
It
mind.
was a culture shock, you know? I tell people today, I'm like, you know that movie Taxi Driver? That's what New York City was like in 1977. 42nd Street, pimps, hookers, pawn shops, triple X everywhere. You know, it was amazing. I mean, we were bumpkins from New Hampshire, but we like fell in love with the filth and the dirt and the grime and just the grittiness of like what was going on there, you know? And I mean, that was just I guess that was kind of just a part of us because that's kind of how our music was starting to form and everything. So, yeah, but it was quite a culture shock for sure, you know, but we loved it, you know. And so that year, my brother and I had put an ad in the Boston Phoenix, which is, you know, the weekly entertainment paper, and there was a section in the back for gigs, people looking for gigs and stuff like that. So we had put an ad in the Boston Phoenix, and we got a reply from a guy named Johnny Angel, who was in a band called Thrills. And they had been together maybe a year or two. They'd already played with the Stranglers. They were already like established in the scene in New York, in Boston. And Johnny calls up and says, hey, you guys want to audition? And we were like, fuck yeah. So Johnny Angel drove from Boston up to Vermont to audition us. Well, we passed the audition, but my brother decided he didn't want to move to Boston, and he didn't want to be a drummer. He wanted to be a frontman. He wanted to do his own thing. And I jumped at the opportunity. So, and in the meantime, we were both working like shitty jobs, you know, shoe factory. He was working at a shoe factory. I was working bottling maple syrup and honey in somebody's basement, you know. So basically and plus Gigi was waiting for his high school sweetheart. Yeah. I hate to say it, but Gigi was pussy whipped at that time. I know you're not going to believe that, but it's true. So Gigi was kind of pussy whipped, and he was waiting for Sandy to graduate high school. And he basically just wanted to do his own thing. Me, I wanted to move. I wanted to get the fuck out. I wanted to move to Boston. I wanted to play with this band Thrills. So I would work all week. I'd rent a car on the weekend. I would drive down to Boston. I would rehearse with the band. I would drive back home, go back to work, and I did that for about a month. And then I was ready. I moved to Boston when I was like 22 years old and never went back. Well, I went back to visit, but I went back for my brother's wedding, which was the same year, 1978. He got married. Sandy graduated high school, and they got married in October. I went to the wedding, actually malpracticed, got up and played a couple of songs, you know. So, and also, we had already recorded, me and my brother had already recorded the first Jabbers single, which was Gigi's first real band with him fronting, was Gigi Allen and the Jabbers. But we had already recorded the single before there was even a band. Before I moved, this would have been 1977 or so, that we recorded the single. And then I moved to Boston, started playing with Thrills, and Gigi got married, moved to Manchester, New Hampshire, which is about an hour from Boston. And he formed the Jabbers. And so I was playing shows with Thrills. He was playing shows with the Jabbers, and a couple of times his band actually opened for Thrills. You know, we were popular. We were like, Thrills was like one of those bands that was a weekend headliner. So we also got to open for big bands that would come to town. We opened for the Ramones. We opened for the Cars. We opened for U2. I mean, we opened for a lot of big bands, you know. And my brother was doing his thing in Manchester and becoming notorious. He was like, they called him the madman of Manchester, New Hampshire, because the Jabbers, poor Jabbers, they were so frustrated with my brother because they would rehearse for hours and hours, and they were a really good band. They were fucking tight, solid, had great songs. My brother was a master songwriter, you know. They had really great songs, but they would go out to shows, and my brother would start doing shit and get thrown out, you know. I mean, it was a gradual progression. He wasn't like shitting on stage in 1978, you know. But, you know, he would go out and flip people's tables, or, you know, take somebody's drink and pour it on their head, or pour it in their face, or shit like that, or, you know, hang from fucking water pipes from the stage, and just, you know, doing little shit like that. But still, stuff like that got you thrown out of clubs.
What was your brother's personality like? On stage, was he a different person than who he was in real life?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, and like I say, that gradually got more and more violent. I mean, you know, in the late 70s, early 80s, it was more innocent kind of like craziness, you know. But as things progressed, and I feel that my poor brother got trapped in his own insanity, maybe, or because he always seemed to have to push the envelope a little bit more, you know.
And once that wild man persona became,
and once you have that kind of persona, and you know, people expect things of you, then you have to take it to another level, and then you got to take it to a next level, and that's kind of how it worked out. Of course, as he got a little older and the more alcohol consumption, that didn't help matters at all, you know. And the drug thing, I mean, you know, my brother was not a junkie by any means. He really didn't do heroin hardly at all, you know. I mean, he'd do whatever you gave him. If you gave him drugs, he'd take them. He wouldn't even ask you what they were. He'd just take them. But he wasn't a junkie, and he wasn't, you know, drugs was not his problem. Alcohol was. Yeah. So as he progressed, you know, I mean, the Jabbers' first album came out in 1980. Great record. He would come down to Boston and play. I would go to his shows. Fucking, the Jabbers were an amazing band. They were fucking really great. But in the Boston scene, nobody cared. They weren't cool in Boston at all, you know. So they were not a headliner at all. They would come down on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night and play for maybe 30 people or something, you know. There was no, but I mean, like I said, none of us cared at that point. Even at that stage, none of us gave a shit about money. We were just happy to be playing, you know. I mean, think of this. In 1977, I'm working a shitty job in New Hampshire. I'm going to work every day with homemade cassette tapes of the Ramones, the Dead Boys, the Sex Pistols, all that shit. A year later, I'm living in Boston, and my band is opening for the Ramones and the Dead Boys and all of these fucking bands. So you don't think I was in my fucking heaven? I mean, that was like that period of my life, probably one of the best periods of my whole life, because rock and roll was still new, the punk scene was still new. Bands were experimenting, and bands sounded different. Not every band sounded the same, because everybody was trying to make their own way, you know, and it wasn't like, oh, this band's really popular, let's get on the bandwagon so we can sound like them so we can, you know, be popular. It wasn't like that. Everybody had a different sound, and it was unique, and it was new and fresh, and a lot of it was really great. I still listen to a lot of the old bands from the late 70s, early 80s that I used to go see in Boston all the time. I still listen to that stuff today because it's held out through the test of time.
Well, the 70s, I think for music, were both the best and the worst decade for music.
Absolutely. Well, I would say the 80s would be considered that too, because the 70s, I mean, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of great stuff in the 70s, a lot of trash.
But like radio in the 70s was awful.
Yeah.
A lot of things were awful about popular music.
But we didn't care about the radio. We never, you know, we never wrote a song or made music or did anything to get on the radio or even to be popular. We didn't care. We did what we liked to do. And if people liked it, that was great. And if they didn't like it, fuck you, I don't give a fuck, you know? So, yeah, as Gigi progressed through the 80s, he was playing with different, well, you know, the Jabbers had broken up and then reformed in 2 or 3 different, you know, deals, but they just got frustrated with him because they would rehearse and go to a show, and the show would last like 10 minutes and he'd get thrown out, and that would be the end of that. So that's when he started kind of doing different things with different bands, you know. Did stuff with a band called the Scumfucks, did stuff with, this 1985. That was the beginning right there. That was the first time that Gigi defecated on stage. In a VFW club in Peoria, Illinois, a guy named Bloody Mess, who was a fan and also had his own band, lived in Peoria, invited Gigi out for a show, and that was the first time that he had defecated on stage. And we were just like, my poor mom and my stepdad, they just couldn't believe it, you know, and I was even like trying to, you know, be like, what are you doing, man? I mean, you're fucking really talented, you know. I mean, if my brother had decided to clean up his act and actually play the game, he could have been someone. I'm not saying that he isn't someone, because he definitely is. He's a fucking legend. But he could have been commercially successful because he really was a master songwriter.
If he chose to go more mainstream.
If he had chose to go more mainstream, he could have done good things, you know. I mean, that first Jabbers record is power pop, rock and roll. It's fucking really great record, you know, and it's really not that foul. I mean, there's a song called Ass Face and, you know, shit like that. But for the most part, it wasn't that bad. But the progression just got, you know, I mean, he's writing songs like, you know, I want to fuck myself and, you know, needle up my cock and and scumfuck tradition and fucking cunt sucking cannibal. And,
Was it just for shock value that he did a lot of that stuff?
He just wrote songs about the reality of life, and in the rock and roll business, they like love songs and songs that the mainstream can connect with. And, people aren't connecting with, hey, girls, give me some head. Mainstream people don't want to hear, you got VD and you had a needle up your cock. Nobody wants to hear that. Not everybody wants to hear that anyway. So Gigi became more of like a cult thing, and boy, he was hated though. He was hated by so many people. Oh my God. Reviews. Every time he did a record, the reviews would just be like the worst thing you could ever imagine. But who cared? Who fucking cared, man? You're doing what you like to do. And he was a master at promoting himself. He would do interviews for a zine if 20 people saw it. He was always doing zines and interviews. He'd do whatever the hell it took to get his name out there. And over the course of time, he built up a following. And So basically, I did the Thrills thing, he did that. My band ended up breaking up 82, 83, somewhere around there maybe. And I was back to living a shitty fucking life. I got married to a fucking alcoholic. That was the worst 3 fucking years of my life. I was working in a fucking laundromat, doing people's fucking laundry and being fucking miserable. Meanwhile, my brother was out there fucking raising hell and doing this and that. And I was like, fuck, man, I got to get back into this shit, So around 87, 88, we decided we were going to try to put a band back together again. Because at that point, he had been playing shows and stuff, but some of the times he would just pick up bands in different cities. Sometimes he would just show up to a gig with a boombox and do a spoken word and just do his performance shit and all that. And he hadn't had a real serious, solid band in some time, We considered Gigi to be like the Chuck Berry of punk rock because he could have a band in any given city in any given time. And he would show up and sometimes they'd be okay, sometimes they would suck, sometimes they wouldn't know his songs and it wouldn't even matter because he'd go on stage and just improvise anyway and do whatever he had to do. He was doing a lot of drinking, so he was really out of control. We had started hanging out more again. And I had gotten divorced at that point and was single, so we decided that we would start a band called the AIDS Brigade. So this would have been 1988. It was me and my brother, Chris Brokaw, and another kid from New Hampshire that was living in Boston at the time. And we were rehearsing and Gigi was writing a few songs. But this is Boston. And Boston at that time was very conservative. And we ended up only playing one show. And the one show that we did play, we had to dress in drag to get into the show because Gigi had been banned from the venue that we were booked at. So when we booked the show, we told the venue that, oh, this is just a benefit for my brother. He won't be involved, And but of course, we all dressed in drag and we went and played the show. And that was 1989. In the meantime, in 1988, we had recorded the Homestead Records single. My brother had signed with Homestead Records in the later 80s, so he did a record called You Give Love a Bad Name with the Holy Men. He did a record with a band called Bulge, which was actually a band called Psycho from Boston. And that was an album called Freaks, Faggots, Drunks, and Junkies. So, but by 1988, we had recorded the single, which was Gypsy Motherfucker, Hanging Out with Jim, and Expose Yourself to Kids. So that was the single. But like I said, at that time, Boston was very conservative, and even just finding good people to play with, you know, anybody that could play really well didn't want to play with us. They thought we were a joke, you know. And the people that sucked wanted to play with us, and we didn't want somebody that sucked. We'd already been through that stage, you know. We've sucked enough in our life. We wanted to be good for a change, right? Well, everything derailed. The show we did with the AIDS Brigade in August of '89. By September of '89, Gigi had been arrested and was about to start a 3-year prison sentence for intent to commit bodily harm less than murder. There was an incident in Michigan when Gigi was playing with a band called the Disappointments, and a girl had invited them to her apartment for a gangbang. Well, you know, Gigi's gangbang and somebody else's gangbang are going to be completely different. So I don't really believe she knew what she was getting herself into, but she got tied up and cuffed up and abused and beaten and carved up, all kinds of shit like that. And she ended up in the hospital. Of course, in the very beginning, she didn't blame Gigi. She took the easy way out, like a lot of people do. Oh, a bunch of black guys attacked me. But then when she wanted Gigi to marry her after that happened, and he refused, then she decided it was time to go to the cops. And so my brother got arrested and started serving time at Jackson State Prison in Michigan. And at that point, I had remarried and decided it was time to get out of Boston because there was nothing going on there anymore. And we moved to New York City. And the plan was, while Gigi was in prison, because the whole time Gigi was in prison, he was writing, he was, you know, doing interviews, he was doing everything he could do to keep his name relevant and keep it out there so people knew he was still around and that he hadn't, you know, buckled to the fucking system and whatever. So the plan was I was going to move to New York. I was going to find a band. And when Gigi got out of prison, we would start touring. Now, neither one of us had ever really properly toured, you know. I mean, my bands were all basically local bands. You know, we would play in New York once in a while. We'd play here and there, but touring, never. And the same thing with Gigi, you know. I mean, a tour for Gigi back in the days would be getting on a Greyhound bus and, like I said, picking up a band here and playing a show there and maybe, you know, being on the road for 2 or 3 weeks and playing 2 or 3 shows. You know, that was kind of the extent of any kind of real touring that was going on. I mean, I'd say more so with the disappointments he toured with than with anyone else, but not really, you know. So the plan was, you know, he'd get out of prison, which he did in 1991. And at that time, I had met a guitar player who had introduced me to Dino Sex, who was our naked drummer and has been in this band since 1991. And he's still with me today, 30 fucking years later. He's had a stroke, he's had throat cancer, he's beat them both, and he's still playing. So that was the beginning of the Murder Junkies. Gigi got out of prison, August 91. We played a few local shows, and then we went on the road for the first time. Now, Gigi was booking shows, I was booking shows. Like I said, we had never properly toured in our life. So you can imagine what kind of a fiasco the first tour was. I mean, we would play a show in Texas. We'd drive 3 days to get to California to play another show. We'd drive like 2 or 3 days to cut across somewhere else to play another show. It was really stupidity and insanity all at the same time, you know? And, you know, I mean, back then, nobody wanted to book. It was hard enough to get a show for my brother as it was, you know? But he was booking shows and I was booking shows. And the first time we went out together, it was, I mean, it was exciting. It was, boy, it was pretty fucking scary too. You know, there were a lot of scary times on tour with my brother. I'm not afraid to admit that, but it was great. It was
what kind of fears?
Well, you know, when you got bottles whizzing by your fucking head, you know, and you're not, that's why we started wearing helmets in 1993.
Because he would get the crowd so rowdy?
You know, a Gigi Allin audience was your best friend before the show and your worst nightmare after the show, because it wouldn't matter how many beers you had with somebody before the show and how great everything was. When Gigi hit that fucking stage, he became a psycho. He became another fucking animal. And you could be cheering him on with a beer 1 minute and have a fucking fist in your fucking head the next minute. So Gigi made a lot of enemies during shows. And there were many times where we would get in the van and get chased out of town. Our tires would get slashed. Our fucking windows would get broken. I mean, which, you know, after a week in the same van with my brother, after defecating on stage over and over, we were pretty happy to get a new van, let me tell you that. You know, and normally, and that happened like usually 2 or 3 times on a tour, you know. I think Hertz finally decided to stop renting to us. You know, it was really that bad, you know. But yeah, the first tour was kind of an experiment. And once we realized we could all do this and we were all really enjoying it, we fired our guitar player because we fucking hated him. And at that time, we had put an ad in the Village Voice. We were looking for a guitar player. So a young fellow named William Weber answered the ad. He was a hotshot guitar player from Cincinnati. But also, interesting enough, Dee Dee Ramone answered the ad. So I nearly shit my pants when my phone rang and it was Dee Dee Ramone asking if he could audition for the Murder Junkies. I got off the phone, I called my brother up, and we just fucking laughed our asses off. We were like, what the fuck is going on here, you know? I mean, we couldn't believe it. We were like, is this a joke? But it wasn't. I mean, I had seen Dee Dee. Dee Dee was like a fixture on the Lower East Side, you know, back in those days, like all those guys were, you know? And so we set up an audition, and Bill Weber and Dee Dee Ramone came in, and after the audition, me and my brother were like, well, Weber's great. We got to get him in the band. And we got to get Dee Dee because he's Dee Dee, right? I'm not going to say no to Dee Dee Ramone. You want to play with the Murder Junkies? You're in, baby. So we spent a little bit of time hanging out with Dee Dee, and he would rehearse with us, and he would come and hang out with us and stuff. At that time, also, a young NYU filmmaker named Todd Phillips entered the scene. Now, I met Todd Phillips at a place called Kim's Video on St. Mark's in the East Village. It was like the alternative video store. Had all the like old school horror, the European horror, all the cool stuff you couldn't find at Blockbuster and places like that, right? So Todd Phillips was actually working the counter at Kim's Video. And I would go in there every day because I was a bootlegger at the time. So I would go in there and rent like all these obscure movies, right? I'd take them home, put the little tape over the tab and make copies of them. And then I was I was selling them to people in bumfuck nowhere that couldn't see that shit. So got to befriend Todd, and found out he was an NYU student and he wanted to do a film about my brother and us. So we were like, cool, yeah, great, wonderful. So he was filming us and doing stuff, and this was around the same time Dee Dee was jamming with us a little bit. And we had a show set up where Todd was going to come down and film. It was at a place called The Bank on the Lower East Side. And we're all hanging out in my apartment. And it's a day of show. People are down at the club. We're waiting for, the film crew's all down there. Dee Dee's down there waiting for us. It would have been our first gig with Dee Dee, right? And the club owner calls me and goes, well, you're not going to be able to do this, and you're not going to be able to do that, and blah, blah, blah. So the club owner's yelling at me in one ear, right? Gigi's yelling at me in the other ear. Fuck that guy. I'm not doing I'll do whatever the fuck I want, right? And the club owner's yelling, Gigi's yelling, and I'm in the middle, and all of a sudden, the show's canceled. So I think at that point, and we were getting ready to go on tour with Dee Dee. There were already flyers for shows that had Dee Dee Ramone's name on it and stuff. And I don't know, I think Dee Dee got disillusioned by the whole thing. And, his thing was like, well, I wanted to leave the Ramones because I didn't want any pressure, and shit like that. And we were like, we didn't really think he understood what he was getting himself into. I think as it got closer to tour time and seeing that show get canceled at the Bank made him realize that he wasn't going to be able to hang with us, And he left the band. No explanation, no nothing. Left his amp, left everything, So that was the end of Dee Dee. So Dee Dee left the band, and we did another tour in '91. And this time, I did the booking. So things went a little bit smoother. But it was full of chaos and violence and just the same craziness that we had gotten used to, you know? And we really loved it. Everybody loved what we were doing. I mean, we did anyway. I'm sure some of the fans didn't love it. But we would, you know, some shows got shut down. Some shows went over really well. There was fights at some shows and stuff like that. And so we came back. In '92, we started another tour. And this time, didn't start out so well. We had a show in Dalton, Georgia. And a lot of underage kids came to the show. A lot of underage drinking. I think about 30 people got arrested. And Gigi got arrested with Dino. And I think it must have been like one of the first shows of the tour, very beginning of the tour, because we had no money. And all we had was enough money to bail my brother out. Obviously, we had to bail my brother out because without a singer, we're not going anywhere, right? So we had to leave Dino in jail, and we had to travel from Dalton, Georgia. We went to Atlanta. Now, my brother had people there because he knew people everywhere, you know. So we picked up a drummer for the night. I forget his name, but we picked up a drummer for the night, played the show, got paid, drove all the way back to Dalton, Georgia, bailed Dino out, and then had to drive all the way to, I think, like New Orleans or some far distant place where we were playing that night or whatever. So that was the beginning of the tour. Then half a dozen shows into the tour. Now you got to remember, Gigi's on parole, right? But he doesn't care. I'm going on fucking tour. I don't give a fuck. I'm not supposed to leave the state. Fuck you. He doesn't give a shit, right? So, you know, you're on parole. You're parading around the fucking country, you know, all this violent shit going on around you. You're getting arrested here and there. Finally, in Austin, Texas, Gigi gets nabbed. They extradite him back to Michigan. The tour's over. We're like 6 days or a week or something like that into the tour. Tour's over. Gigi's going back to prison. He's going to finish out his 3-year sentence. And that was the end of that. Back home we go. So, okay. It's put a little derailing in our plans, but so the next plan was, okay, Gigi's going to get out of prison in April '93. So we spend that whole year writing music so we could record a new record. When Gigi got out of prison, we were ready to record a brand new album. We hadn't done anything with him at that point, you know. And so we're writing and rehearsing and writing and rehearsing, going through the year of fucking all that shit. Gigi gets out of prison. He's like, send me the fucking songs. I send him a copy of the songs, and literally 3 fucking days later, he's like, book the studio time. I got the record all done. And I'm like, what? I just sent you the fucking tape like 3 days ago. That's my brother. So, okay. So we book time in a studio in New York, Don Fury's studio. Now, Don Fury at the time was a very well-known, very well-respected engineer, producer. He was doing a lot of the major hardcore bands. I'm sorry, I can't tell you the names, but he was doing a lot of big hardcore bands. He was actually doing major label bands, you know? And somebody was willing to put money up to front the record, so we were able to go there and record. Now, poor Don, he's thinking to himself, I don't know if I want these fucking people in my studio, you know? I mean, he gave us a chance. I got to give him credit, you know? And my brother was well behaved. He was on a mission. He had a plan. And when my brother had shit to do, you know, the drugs and the alcohol went out the door. When there was something really important that he needed to do, he could let all that shit go and get it done, because that's his first love, you know. So he came in pretty sober, pretty straight. We recorded the fucking record called Brutality and Bloodshed for All. And that was in April. Then we hit the road in May for what would be known as the Terror in America 1993 tour. It was billed as the most violent, the most, you know, outrageous tour in music history at the time, you know. And it lived up to its name. It was just, you know, when my brother got out of prison, well, before he went to prison, there was a lot more self-mutilating on stage. When he got out of prison, there was a lot more violence directed to the fucking crowd. He was pissed. My brother got out of prison, he was pissed. He wasn't the same. He was more violent towards everybody. I mean, my brother was antisocial personality disorder. He was narcissistic. He didn't give a fuck what he did to whoever he did it to. He had no conscience. He'd fucking put a cigarette out in your face and fucking laugh at you, you know? No fucking morals at all. I mean, literally, he was out of control, you know? But he was more out of control towards other people and not abusing himself as much, you know? So we did a whole tour of the whole country. Lasted about a month and a half, something like that. Came back home. The tour was over, but we wanted to play a last show in New York City before we kind of took a break, you know? So we booked a show at a place called the Gas Station. Now, the gas station was just this building with some sculptures outside. It was like on the Lower East Side on 1st Street or 2nd Street or around Avenue B. It was in a really shitty neighborhood in New York. And that would turn out to be the final show. That day, we all got together. We went over to a friend's house. We were hanging out. Gigi was doing lots of coke. He was totally fucking wired. Like, I mean, my brother was wired anyway, like just naturally wired. He had no patience for anything. So cocaine and alcohol had already been introduced that day. We get to the show. Everything just went to shit. The sound system sucked. There were no the microphones ended up getting busted the first couple. We ended up playing 3 fucking songs. Show got shut down. The Lower East Side turned out into a fucking riot area. I mean, there were kids in the fucking street. My brother was fucking wandering the street, fucking naked. Fucking cop cars, fucking all over the place. They didn't fucking give a shit. They weren't gonna touch him, you know? I mean, if they had arrested him, he probably would have still been alive the next day, but anyway, between the cocaine and the alcohol and just the whole show getting shut down, my brother frustrated, wandering around the streets on the Lower East Side with a bunch of junkies, you know, trying to figure out what they were going to do with the rest of their day. Gigi ended up at this fucking kid's house, and they started doing heroin. Now, my brother was not used to doing heroin. He wasn't a junkie. Contrary to a lot of people's beliefs, because he OD'd, everybody thinks my brother was a junkie. Not true. So, you know, between the cocaine and the drugs and the alcohol and the heroin, he passed away during the night. Everybody woke up the next morning. My brother's dead. I get called. Had to go identify the fucking body, all that shit. I was just like, wow, what the fuck's going on here? So that was probably one of the worst days of my life, you know. And yeah, it was over. And had to deal with all that shit. Then I had to deal with, you know, everything else that came along after that. And, you know, I've been doing that for the last 30 fucking years now, you know. Fortunately for myself, the Brutality and Bloodshed for All record didn't get released until the fall of that year. So we really had no intentions or no thoughts of keeping the band together. I mean, our singer's dead, you know, or he's gone. I mean, that's the end of the fucking dream, right? Well, when the record came out, we started getting really good reviews from it, you know? And people were like, you know, you should keep the band going. You should do this. You should do that. And, you know, I was kind of leery about it, but, I mean, the record was really great, and everybody loved it, and I wanted to keep playing, you know? I wanted to keep doing what we were doing. I mean, so foolish me at the time decided to give it a go. Let's go out and tour, because we hadn't even played those songs. I think we'd played a few of them on the tour because we'd written them before the tour. So we played a couple of them, but I don't think any of us we were familiar with them because we'd been playing them. Gigi wasn't as familiar with the vocals, so we didn't play that many of them on the 93 tour. So in 1994, we decided to go out and do a Brutality and Bloodshed for All tour. We recruited Jeff Clayton from a band called Anti-Scene, who was good friends with us, who had done a record with Gigi in the past and had done projects with my brother. And we were already friends, so he stepped in and sang with us on that tour. And it went over okay. You know, people, in the beginning, after Gigi died, it was very difficult.
Hard to replace.
Very, well, yeah. I mean, there's no replacing. We weren't trying to replace Gigi, the Gigi that he was. We were trying to replace Gigi with someone that had the same ideas, but wasn't going to be Gigi. We weren't looking for a clone. That was definitely out. So that was a problem, because we were getting all kinds of people. Oh, I can come in, I can shit on stage, I can do this, yeah, but you suck, so fuck you, you know? I mean, you can't sing, you shit, fuck you, you know? So we dealt with a lot of that. And we did find a singer. We had Mike Hudson from the Pagans sang with us for a short period of time. He sucked, so we had to fire him. And then Mike Denied came along, another fucking junkie. So I got a junkie in my fucking band. He died a few years ago, but we did do a record with him, and we did do a tour or two with him. It was really difficult because, you know, you stop at a fucking rest area to take a piss and get something to drink, and 10 minutes later, you got to go fucking kick in the fucking stall in the bathroom because your fucking singer's sitting there with a needle in his arm, sitting on the toilet seat, passed out. So that's the kind of shit we had to deal with in the mid to later 90s. And then eventually it just got to be too much. And in the early part of 1999, we decided to call it a day. So.
Super interesting story.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
What would you say is the most important thing you've learned from that whole journey with your family, with Gigi?
You know, I say you have to do what makes you happy. And if other people don't like it, then you can't worry about what other people think. And I've gotten over that long ago because believe me, the hundreds of great things that people say about me, there's always going to be some asshole out there that's, oh, you're living off your brother's name. You're doing this. You're doing that. Fuck you. I don't even care. I don't even look at the good reviews or the bad reviews anymore because I don't even give a fuck what anybody says. You know, I know what I'm doing, and as long as I enjoy what I'm doing, I'm going to continue to do it, like it or not. You know.
Beautiful. All right, Merle. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you.
I mean, there is more, you know. Maybe another time.